He was always in the background. 3 steps behind the king. Never in the center of any photograph. Never the one people came to see. That was exactly how he wanted it. For years, millions of people watched King Charles walk through crowds, wave to supporters, and attend the grandest ceremonies in Britain. And in almost every single piece of footage, just slightly out of focus, slightly to the side, there was a man. Bearded. Calm. Suited. Holding an umbrella. His eyes never stopped moving. His name was Jag. The world did not know that yet. The world would not know that for a very long time. But the world noticed him anyway, because some people are impossible to ignore even when they are trying their absolute hardest to be invisible. Jagivan Singh Kangura joined the Metropolitan Police over 30 years ago. He was not born into royalty. He did not grow up near any palace. He was a boy who came from somewhere ordinary, who worked his way through the ranks of one of the most demanding police forces on the planet, and who eventually found himself standing in the most extraordinary rooms in Britain, protecting the most recognizable man in the country. He earned every single step of that journey. The world inside Scotland Yard's Royalty Protection Group is not the world of television dramas. There are no car chases through London every afternoon. There is no dramatic music playing as officers run across rooftops. The real work is quieter than that, and in many ways harder. Officers are trained in firearms and unarmed combat. They learn advanced driving. They study emergency first aid until it becomes reflex rather than memory. They learn how to walk in formation beside a royal, how to scan a venue before the principal arrives, how to assess a crowd of 10,000 faces and identify the 3 that require a second look. They also learn something that cannot be taught in any classroom. They learn how to disappear while standing in plain sight. Jag mastered this completely. For over 2 decades, he worked within the Royalty and Specialist Protection branch of the Metropolitan Police. He protected the royal family through some of the most significant events in modern British history. He stood in palaces and cathedrals. He traveled to foreign countries where the risk assessments were complicated and the unfamiliar terrain demanded constant readiness. He protected Charles when Charles was not yet king, when he was still the Prince of Wales moving through a world that was already watching him closely but had not yet placed a crown on his head. Through all of it, Jag remained in the background. He was not the story. He was the person making sure the story could continue. The public first truly noticed him in September 2022, when Queen Elizabeth II died and the entire nation held its breath. The grief was enormous and visible, and it filled every street in London. Thousands of people pressed against barriers, holding flowers, holding photographs, holding each other. Charles, newly king, stepped out into that grief to meet his people. The cameras were everywhere. The emotion was barely containable. And there, just to the side of the king, was the bearded man in the suit. A moment came, caught on video and shared millions of times in the days that followed, that showed Jag doing something unexpectedly human in the middle of an enormous public moment. As the king moved through the crowd, people lifted their phones to capture him, the way people always do, holding little screens between themselves and the moment they are actually living. Jag leaned toward the crowd gently, and he asked them to put their phones down. To be present. To simply experience what was happening without a screen in the way. It was such a small thing. It was also, somehow, exactly the right thing. People who saw that clip felt something that was difficult to explain. There was no drama in what he did. He did not shout. He did not push anyone away. He simply asked a group of grieving people to put down their devices and be there with their king, in that moment, on that street. And people responded to it. They responded to the quiet authority of a man who clearly had no interest in performing his importance, because his importance was never in question. That clip traveled across the internet. People shared it with notes attached. People said things like, "There is something very right about this man." They were correct, though they did not yet know his name. The internet, as it always does, gave him one of its own. The Kingsman. It came from the films, from the fictional secret agent with the polished shoes and the hidden weapon and the unbreakable calm. The comparison was obvious once someone made it. Jag had the beard. He had the suit. He had the umbrella that never left his hand, and that umbrella became the centerpiece of its own mythology very quickly. People on social media began studying it with the intense focus that the internet reserves for objects attached to mystery. They nicknamed it the Gunbrella. They built theories. They were half joking and half genuinely convinced that the umbrella concealed something extraordinary. A security expert addressed this publicly and explained, with considerable patience, that the umbrella was an umbrella. This did not stop anyone. The Gunbrella theory lived on. People kept sharing it. At events, at walkabouts, at state occasions, whenever Jag appeared in frame with his umbrella and his steady gaze and his three-piece suit, someone in the comments would say the Gunbrella is back. People gushed over him in the way usually reserved for actors. He needs to be the next James Bond, one person wrote. He is magnificent, wrote another. Someone asked, entirely seriously, whether he gave beard maintenance tips. He said nothing about any of it. He kept working. The coronation of King Charles III, in May 2023, was one of the most watched events in British history. Westminster Abbey was filled with royalty and heads of state. The ceremony had been prepared for years, in some sense, because the preparations for any coronation never fully stop between one reign and the next. Security for an event of that scale is not a matter of simply placing officers at doors. It is months of detailed planning. It is mapping every route, understanding every risk, coordinating with multiple agencies across multiple countries, and then standing in position on the day itself and trusting that the preparation was sufficient. Jag was central to that planning. He was there on the day. He was visible in footage, a familiar bearded figure moving through the background of an historic occasion with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. The months after the coronation brought more events, more crowds, more state visits to foreign countries where security considerations shifted with every border crossed. Jag traveled with the king. Canada. The United States. Bermuda. Wherever the royal calendar demanded, he went. He assessed venues before Charles arrived. He stood nearby during public engagements where the crowds pressed close and the noise was high and the variables were never fully predictable. He was seen at Royal Ascot in the summer mornings, where the horses ran and the champagne poured and the king arrived in a carriage through the famous Golden Gates. He was seen at the Maundy Thursday service in April 2025, umbrella in hand, and a royal fan who photographed him wrote that his expression alone communicated something quintessentially British, something from another era, something both serious and quietly magnificent. The comments under that photograph were warm and affectionate in the way that only genuine admiration produces. And still, officially, he had no name. Buckingham Palace had never named him. The Metropolitan Police, for reasons of operational security that required no further explanation, had kept him anonymous. He moved through one of the most photographed institutions on earth and remained, for years, a mystery. There was something fitting about this. The job required anonymity. The job required that his face become familiar enough to belong to the background without ever drawing attention to itself. He had achieved this so completely that when his name eventually became known, it felt like a curtain being pulled back on something that had always been there but never quite visible. His final assignment came in the spring of 2026. King Charles and Queen Camilla traveled to the United States for a 4-day state visit at the end of April. It was a demanding tour under circumstances that were particularly tense. A shooting incident had taken place at the White House Correspondents' Dinner on April 25, just days before the royal visit was scheduled to begin. The security teams on both sides of the Atlantic had to reassess everything. The American agents deployed snipers and sophisticated aerial monitoring. British officers coordinated alongside them with the precision that comes from years of working at exactly this level of consequence. Jag was there through all of it. He stood beside the king at the garden party at the British Embassy on the opening day of the visit. He was present at every engagement across those 4 days. He maintained the same steady presence he had maintained through decades of royal protection, in a foreign city under elevated threat, as if the pressure were simply the weather and he had long ago made his peace with always working outdoors. When the visit ended and the royal party returned home, so did Jag. And then, quietly, he stepped away. The Times reported it first. His long career in royal protection was coming to its close. He had served for more than 30 years in total, more than 2 decades of those years spent inside royalty and specialist protection. He had been through everything. Grief and ceremony. Normal days and impossible ones. Ordinary Tuesday mornings outside Buckingham Palace and the extraordinary days that history would record and replay for generations. He was done. On the 10th of June 2026, a private celebration was held at Chelsea Barracks in central London. Colleagues came. Friends came. A businessman named James Eaton, who had known Jag personally and had seen him photographed across the globe in suits from his own British clothing brand, attended and wrote about it afterwards. He called Jag one of the finest people he had ever met. He called him one of the most photogenic and stylish men he had ever encountered. He said it was an honor to have been invited to celebrate the retirement of a man who represented something genuinely admirable, decades of serious, professional, quiet service to king and country. The speech was warm and full of obvious affection. Jag received it the way he received everything. With dignity. Then the king's birthday honors list was released. It is released each year to coincide with the official birthday celebrations and the Trooping the Colour ceremony, and it is the mechanism through which the crown formally acknowledges the people who have served it with distinction. Every name on that list represents a life spent giving something to the country, to the institution, to the communities they were part of. This year, one name on that list belonged to a man who had spent his career making sure his name did not appear anywhere. Jajivan Singh Kangura was appointed a member of the Royal Victorian Order, the MVO, for services to royalty and specialist protection. The Royal Victorian Order is not given by a government committee. It is not processed through administrative channels or recommended by a minister. It is bestowed personally by the king. The king chooses the recipients himself, and the honor reflects his personal recognition of service given directly to the sovereign and the royal family. It is, in the most literal sense, a thank you from the monarch himself to someone he trusted with his life. When the announcement came through, his full name appeared in public for one of the first times. Jajivan Singh Kangura. Inspector, Metropolitan Police Service. For services to royalty and specialist protection. 5 words that contained 30 years. The Metropolitan Police released a statement that went further. They described his contribution as exceptional. They spoke about his critical role in planning and delivering security for Queen Elizabeth II's funeral and King Charles's coronation, 2 of the most significant events in modern British history, events that required security planning of extraordinary complexity and flawless execution on the day. They credited his leadership with strengthening specialist policing capabilities over time, through his commitment to developing the officers who worked alongside him and would come after him. He had not just done the job. He had made the people around him better at it. The community Jag came from also noticed the honor. He was recognized among a list of British Sikhs acknowledged in the birthday honors, and the word used to describe his service in some of those accounts was seva. It is a word from the Sikh tradition. It means selfless service. Service given not for recognition or reward, but because the giving itself is the point. It was an accurate word. When Jag was asked about the honor, he said what he meant and stopped there. He said it had been an honor and a privilege to represent his community in service to the king. He said those words, for a boy born, and the record trails off there, incomplete in the way of spoken sentences that carry more weight than their grammar can hold. He also released a statement through the Metropolitan Police, and those words were recorded in full. He said it had been a privilege to serve and to represent his colleagues and his community. He said he was leaving with the happiest of memories. He said he had the utmost respect for all those who serve and sacrifice for king and country. Happiest of memories. This from a man who had spent his career surrounded by the weight of the job. By the assessments and the protocols and the long hours standing in position. By the moments when the crowd moved unexpectedly and the training took over. By the funerals and the ceremonies and the ordinary days that had to be managed with the same seriousness as the extraordinary ones, because the ordinary days are when the extraordinary ones find their openings. Happiest of memories. It was not a phrase designed to impress anyone. It was simply true. A few days after his retirement became public, the king quietly requested that he stay. Not in his former role. Not in the position that had required him to be 3 steps behind and always ready. Something different. Something that would keep him close without asking him to continue at the pace he had sustained for 2 decades. The king and queen, who had worked alongside this man through the most significant seasons of their public lives, were not ready to let him disappear entirely. Some people are impossible to let go of. On the 17th of June 2026, Royal Ascot opened its second day. The king was there. The queen was there. The Prince and Princess of Wales attended. The horses ran and the mourning suits and the extraordinary hats filled the enclosures, and the racecourse did what it has done for 3 centuries. And there, on the grounds, in the finest morning suit, with a black top hat and the umbrella in his hand, was Jag. Retired. Present. Not working. Simply there. He posed for photographs. Solo photographs, which was itself a remarkable thing, given that a solo photograph had never been the point of any moment in his professional life. People recognized him. People who had spent years spotting him in the backgrounds of royal footage, who had laughed about the gunbrella and called him magnificent in comment sections across the internet, now saw him standing in the frame on purpose. The umbrella was still in his hand. Of course it was. There is a particular kind of person who gives everything to a role that asks them to be invisible, who serves with complete seriousness and zero appetite for acknowledgement, and who then, when it is finally over, receives the recognition without embarrassment but also without any particular need for it. The recognition is nice. The recognition is deserved. But it does not change what the years were. The years were what they were regardless of whether anyone named them. Jag Kangura protected the King of England for years. He stood at the edge of history and made sure it was allowed to happen safely. He planned the security for a funeral that the whole world watched and a coronation that the whole world watched and a state visit conducted under elevated threat in a foreign capital. He asked people in a grieving crowd to put their phones down and be present, and they did, because something in the way he asked it left no room for argument. He left with the happiest of memories. He took the honor from his king's hands, the Royal Victorian Order placed there by the men he had protected, and he carried it the way he carried everything else. Quietly. Completely. Without needing to make a moment of it. 3 steps back. Always.